So today we are looking at a submitted draft that synthesizes the fractured response within conservative media to the ongoing harassment of Erika Kirk by Candace Owens and her followers following the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Let's just dive right into the political and personal fallout section because the current narrative structure struggles to reconcile the immediate physical danger posed to Erika Kirk with the broader political maneuvering of figures like JD Vance.
That is immediately. The material currently jumps, so abruptly between these incredibly visceral, highly personal threats and then this high-level political critique of Vance's rhetoric at that University of Georgia.
Right.
The gap between, a stalker trespassing on a private construction site and a politician pandering on a stage, it just feels vast. And as a reader, I am left trying to bridge that gap entirely by myself.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, reading this section feels like trying to watch a true crime stalker thriller on one screen and a really dry political procedural on another screen at the exact same time.
Yes.
It creates this massive tonal whiplash that honestly blunts the impact of both points. Because on one hand, we have Candace Owens followers downloading floor plans, right? They're trespassing on construction sites. They're posting prayers that Erika receives the, quote, same treatment as her assassinated husband.
Which is terrifying.
It's terrifying. And then literally in the next paragraph, we have JD Vance just sort of navigating hecklers and managing his political optics.
Right, but look at how the draft forces those two concepts together. It just places them sequentially in the chapter without building any connective tissue at all.
Yeah, it's just paragraph A, then paragraph B.
Exactly. And we have to ask, is the connection between Vance's political caution and the physical danger to Erika actually established in the text? Or is the author just hoping the proximity of the paragraphs will do the work for them?
I think the weakness here is definitely that the author is hoping proximity equals causality. The text outlines the physical threats to the subject and the political silence of the leadership as simultaneous events, but they read as entirely isolated incidents.
They really do.
So the suggestion here is that we have to restructure the argument to position Vance's political equivocation not just as a separate frustration, but as a direct enabler of those physical threats.
Oh, that's a great way to frame it, because silence basically operates as a permission structure,
Yes, 100%.
When political leaders fail to establish clear boundaries or call out bad actors by name, it sends this powerful signal to the fringes. The author really needs to show the reader that the political procedural actually creates the conditions for the true crime thriller to happen.
Right, and there are several concrete examples of how to actually execute this on the page. One approach is to transition directly from Vance's refusal to explicitly say Candace Owens' main during his condemnation of the harassment, straight into how that specific, calculated silence emboldens the conspiratorial far right.
Right, because the author highlights how Vance says the people attacking Erika are, quote, full of it, but he totally refuses to actually name the architect of the harassment.
Yeah, he won't say the name, and the author could explain how that anonymity serves as a shield. By keeping the condemnation vague, Vance is basically allowing the escalation from mere tweeting to real-world stalking.
Exactly. The harassment network doesn't feel targeted by the leadership, so they just push the boundaries further.
Yeah, and let's take that structural merge further by utilizing Vance's contrasting reactions as another concrete example. The source material details Vance's eagerness to pledge the funding left-wing violence.
Oh, right, yeah.
He explicitly points to the assault on Savannah Hernandez and talks about having agents on the ground to go after the networks funding those radicals.
That is the exact leverage point the author should use right there. You contrast that immediate, forceful, structural action against left-wing violence with his simultaneous pandering to the groper audience, right?
Yes!
And his incredibly weak pushback against the genocide heckler at the exact same event.
That's brilliant. You use his own standard of swift justice against one faction to highlight his deliberate inaction against another.
Exactly. By illustrating how ignoring threats from within one's own camp leaves figures like Erika completely unprotected, the author weaves the political and the physical into a single, unified narrative thread.
Right, the reader shouldn't have to guess why these two ideas share a chapter. The cause and effect must be completely undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely. But, if Vance's silence is the permission slip for this real-world danger, what is the motivation for the people actually driving the harassment?
Right, which brings us to the next point.
because the draft currently frames the antagonist's motivation in very simplistic terms, which leads to our next major issue.
Right. Relying heavily on the commentator's emotional accusations of grifting obscures the deeper, more original ideological shift occurring within these political factions.
Yeah, the weakness here is that the draft leans so heavily on these extensive quotes from commentators who just dismiss Owens simply as a grifter out to make $60 million.
Right. I think that was noted by chicks on the right.
Yeah, exactly. Or acting as a, quote, demonic psychopath, which was claimed by Tina Shea Peter.
Yeah, and while those quotes are accurate reflections of the source material's outrage, presenting them at face value really weakens the author's analytical rigor. I mean, it just reduces the piece to a summary of YouTube drama.
We are basically just tracking who called who a name.
Exactly. The material makes a strong case for the sheer outrage these commentators feel by highlighting these visceral reactions, but it is entirely missing the underlying machinery driving Owens' strategy.
Yeah, calling someone demonic is a theological judge. It's not a structural critique. It just stops the analytical process dead in its tracks.
Right. So my suggestion here is that we need to elevate the analysis by systematically applying Ben Shapiro's grievance party framework to Candace Owens' specific behavioral patterns.
Oh, that framework is already briefly mentioned in the author's notes, but it really needs to be the central lens through which the author interprets these actions.
Yeah, exactly. Because Shapiro's framework separates the political landscape into American exceptionalists who believe in, building institutions, and the bipartisan grievance party who basically believe everything is fundamentally broken and needs to be completely torn down.
Right, and right now, the draft treats Owens' behavior as standard financial opportunism. It's just about money.
Yeah, it's just grifting. But the author could take several concrete paths to deepen this section and move away from that financial opportunism angle.
For instance?
Well, instead of just quoting the chicks on the right saying that Owens is grifting for a massive payday, the author could analyze how she specifically monetizes paranoia. Like, look closely at that University of Georgia event again.
Okay, yeah.
Owens turns a genuine, documented security threat, which was verified by the Secret Service, by the way, into a manufactured PR stunt.
Right. She uses the narrative of a security threat to cover for allegedly low ticket sales, framing herself as the victim of an establishment conspiracy.
Exactly. The author should dissect how creating a conspiracy out of a tragedy is the ultimate grievance party tactic. It feeds an audience that has already been primed to distrust all established narratives.
So it is not just about making a quick buck.
No, it is about reinforcing a worldview where the institutions are always lying to you.
Wow. Yeah, that is a much stronger angle. Another concrete example for the author could be dissecting the Aspen donor controversy.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because Owens uses conflicting donor memories about whether Charlie Kirk explicitly appointed Erika as CEO weeks before his death, right?
Yeah, she uses that ambiguity.
Exactly. She uses it to create this massive, perpetual truth-seeking investigation.
Yeah, the author could totally reframe this not as mere grifting, but as a masterclass in the bipartisan grievance tactic. It's about sowing perpetual, unsolvable doubt to basically fracture Turning Point USA from the inside.
Right, because the goal isn't actually to find the truth about the Aspen donor meeting.
No, the goal is to ensure the question remains permanently open.
Exactly. By systematically attacking the widow's legitimacy, Owens isn't just generating clicks. She is actively attempting a hostile takeover of the faction's ideological real estate.
Yes.
The existing hierarchy has to be destroyed for the grievance party to thrive. Moving the piece beyond simply calling the subject demonic or a scammer and into this kind of sharp structural media criticism will just make the essay significantly more persuasive and original.
I completely agree. But, speaking of being persuasive, because the piece is dissecting such extreme and conspiratorial behavior, the author's own voice must remain impeccably precise and grounded to maintain credibility.
Oh, definitely.
Which leads to our final major point: the inconsistent handling of basic factual details and the inclusion of highly charged, tangential rhetoric undermines the authority of the overall analysis.
Yeah, the weakness here is really jarring. When dealing with subjects who are actively distorting reality, the writer's command of the facts must be absolute.
Right.
But right now, the source notes contain these really distracting spelling discrepancies. They frequently refer to Erika with a C before a final abrupt correction to Erika with a K based on some orthography note.
I saw that. And that basic inconsistency just shatters the illusion of mastery. I mean, if the author cannot be trusted to spell the protagonist's name correctly from paragraph to paragraph, the reader will subconsciously doubt the author's grasp of the complex political dynamics we literally just discussed.
Oh, 100%. It chips away at your trust as a reader.
It does. But the authority issue goes much deeper than just spelling errors.
Yeah, we also have these massive emotional tangents from the quoted commentators that have just been left completely unchecked on the page.
They are so long.
Right? The quotes from JTV detour heavily into the Talmudic history of Cain and Abel, the nature of chosenness, and, the 1,000-year-old Norwich blood libels.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Tanashi Peter goes on these lengthy theological tangents about Judas, spiritual warfare, and Theodore Roosevelt's assassin being visited by William McKinley in a dream.
Which is, what are we even talking about at that point?
Right. Leaving these tangents unedited or untamed disrupts the pacing and entirely distracts the reader from the core thesis about the conservative movement's modern-day fracturing.
Yeah, just look at what happens to the reader's experience. 1 second, we are dealing with a grieving widow facing actual stalkers trespassing on her property, and the very next second, we are reading about 11th century blood libels and McKinley's ghost.
It's absurd.
It completely derails the pace. The author is trying to do way too much by capturing every single word the commentator said instead of filtering it.
So the suggestion is that the author needs to implement a strict editorial filter for factual precision and rhetorical restraint. They need to summarize these extreme religious or historical tangents into brief contextual markers rather than quoting them at length.
Right.
And for concrete examples of how to execute this, first and foremost, the easiest fix. The author must standardize the spelling to Erika Kirk with a K throughout the entire piece.
Right. Every single instance needs to be uniform to maintain that baseline authoritative trust.
Exactly. But beyond the spelling, the author needs to aggressively prune these unwieldy quotes. Like you could distill Tanashi Peter's multi-paragraph spiritual warfare monologue into a single punchy sentence.
How would you phrase that?
The author could simply write, "Some commentators have resorted to apocalyptic theological terms to describe the severity of Owens' behavior."
Oh, that's much better. You acknowledge the intensity of the reaction, you give the reader the flavor of the outrage, but you do not get bogged down in the theology of Judas.
Exactly. You save the reader so much time.
Alternatively, another concrete example. The author could completely cut the McKinley and Roosevelt assassin tangent entirely.
Yes, please cut that.
Instead of exploring the history of dreams prompting historical assassinations, just keep the narrative focused strictly on the established facts of Tyler Robinson's assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, by summarizing the hyperbole rather than reproducing it in full, the author allows the sheer extremity of the real-world events to speak for themselves.
Because they are already extreme.
Right. The facts of the case, a grieving widow facing stalkers, downloading her floor plans, while political allies just look the other way, that is inherently dramatic. They do not need to be dressed up with 11th century history or theological debates to be compelling.
It really comes down to the concept of contrast. The more unhinged the subjects of the critique behave, the more calm, clinical, and precise the author's voice needs to be.
Right, it's like a foil.
Exactly. When the subjects are talking about blood libels and ghosts, the author needs to be wielding a scalpel. That stark contrast is what creates genuine critical authority. Because if the author's prose becomes as frantic and tangential as the YouTubers they are critiquing, the essay just loses its analytical power entirely.
I think that's incredibly well said. So to recap the many points of this critique, this is a deeply researched piece of media criticism that can definitely be elevated to the next level by focusing on 3 structural changes.
Right. First, intertwine JD Vance's political pandering directly with the physical threats to Erika Kirk to create a unified narrative of cause and effect. Show the reader how silence operates as permission.
Yes.
Second, move beyond the surface-level accusations of grifting and use the grievance party framework to dissect exactly how Candace Owens is monetizing paranoia and weaponizing doubt to fracture the organization.
Yes, dig deeper there.
And finally, establish strict editorial authority by standardizing Erika's name and ruthlessly trimming the commentator's extreme theological and historical tangents. The raw material here is incredibly potent. It's such a fascinating topic, and applying a clinical, structured approach to these highly emotional events will make the final argument unassailable.
It really will. We highly encourage the author to apply these revisions and submit the work back to this critique for further review. The foundation is absolutely there, it just needs to be properly aligned.
Exact. Looking forward to reading the next draft.
Me too. See you next time.